Mexico is one of the most beautiful countries in the world, full of color, music, and life. But like any place with deep history and struggle, beauty often exists right beside fear. Being Mexicano myself, I've grown up surrounded by both the warmth of family and tradition, but also the stories of violence of the cartels, specifically the Mexican cartels, which we're going to talk about today. I know how often people online reduce Mexico to just cartel beheadings, so in this video, I want to give you guys real context. From public beheadings meant to send a message, to victims dissolved in acid so that no trace of them remained, to entire families caught in a crossfire they never asked for. Today's video will dive into the brutal reality of cartel executions. These aren't legends or exaggerated stories. They're real accounts of when power, fear, and money twist human life into something unrecognizable. And I'm not here to glorify any of it. In order to demonstrate these executions, obviously, I'm not going to show that on YouTube. I can't show that on YouTube. So we do have 3D modeling once again. You guys seem to really like the 3D modeling. It seems to get the point across way easier than just showing some images on the screen. And plus, sometimes we literally have nothing to put in the background, so this is the perfect solution for a lot of stuff. So you will be seeing 3D modeling more often on this channel. With that being said, my name is Alberto, and I'm here to break it all down in a way that YouTube doesn't give me limited ads, to help people understand why these tragedies happen in a country that deserves to be known for so much more. DEA agent murdered by the Guadalajara cartel, torture. There's a reason the DEA calls February 7th of 1985 the day everything changed. Before that date, no American drug enforcement agent had ever been murdered while working undercover in Mexico. After that date, the entire relationship between the US and Mexico would actually never be the same. Kiki Camarena, also known as Kiki, was 37 years old and just 3 weeks away from transferring back home to California. He'd spent 4.5 years working undercover in Guadalajara, getting close to some of the most powerful drug traffickers in Mexico: Rafael Caro Quintero, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, and Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. These three men formed the core of what would become known as the Guadalajara Cartel, and they were making hundreds of millions of dollars trafficking marijuana and cocaine into the US. Uncle Sam wanted to deliver a solid blow to the cartel, but this time the job required a bit more patience. It wasn't enough to just arrest the kingpins. Kiki wanted to get to the root of their operations, literally. So he went undercover so deeply that he ended up finding their plantations. In November of 1984, Kiki's intelligence led to a raid that destroyed everything Caro Quintero had built. Mexican soldiers backed by helicopters stormed a 2,500-acre marijuana plantation called Rancho Buffalo in Chihuahua. The place was enormous. Some reports say it held up to 10,000 tons of marijuana worth $8 billion. Caro Quintero lost everything, and he knew exactly who was responsible. So on February 7th of 1985, around 2 p.m., Kiki walked out of the American consulate in Guadalajara, heading to lunch with his wife. He was just steps away from his pickup truck when 5 armed men surrounded him. One of them, Samuel Ramirez Razo, a former police officer working as muscle for the cartel, flashed a badge from Mexico's Federal Security Directorate and said, "Let's go, the commander wants to talk to you." They threw him into a car and sped off. The same day, they also grabbed Alfredo Zavala Avelar, a Mexican pilot who had been flying Renaissance missions with Kiki to spot drug fields. Both men were taken to a house at 881 Lope de Vega in Guadalajara, a property Caro Quintero had bought just a month earlier for 4.3 million pesos, roughly $239,000 in today's money. The place was known among the cartel as El Campamento, aka the camp. According to court documents, the house had been prepared specifically for this. Gunmen and bodyguards from both Caro Quintero and Fonseca Carrillo had been arriving since 11 a.m. that morning. Even corrupt state police were there as security. When Kiki arrived, the witnesses say Caro Quintero himself came out to greet him, put his arm around the agent's shoulder, and walked him inside to his study. That's where the torture began. For over 30 hours, Kiki was interrogated about DEA operations in Mexico. He was beaten, tortured with electric shocks, his bones shattered, teeth torn out, body burned, and assaulted with a stick. Court records show his skull was pierced with a metal rod and his ribs were broken. At one point, they even brought in a doctor to keep him alive so the torture could continue. According to autopsy reports, he died from multiple traumas and asphyxiation caused by a fractured thyroid cartilage. That means they likely strangled him or crushed his throat. The same fate must have befell Alfredo the pilot. Their bodies weren't discovered until March 5th, nearly a month later. A farmer in La Angostura, Michoacan, noticed a terrible smell coming from 2 black plastic bags abandoned near his property. Inside, Kiki and Alfredo were found wrapped in plastic, already badly decomposed. Grenade thrown at crowd in Morelia. The date of September 15th in Mexico is usually loud. Fireworks, music, thousands of people packed into plazas across the country shouting "Viva Mexico." So when 2 explosions went off in Morelia's historic center that night in 2008, most people thought it was just part of the show. But then they saw blood. Around 30,000 people had gathered in Plaza Melchor Ocampo, right next to Morelia's cathedral, to celebrate Mexico's 198th Independence Day. Families were everywhere, parents with small on their shoulders, teenagers taking photos, street vendors selling flags and noisemakers. The governor of Michoacán, Leonel Godoy Rangel, had just finished the traditional ceremony called El Grito, where he reenacted the moment in 1810 when a priest rang a church bell and called Mexicans to rise up against Spanish rule. It was just after 11 p.m. when the governor gave his final cry of Viva Mexico and the crowd erupted. That's when witnesses saw a well-built man dressed in black, standing in the middle of the plaza near the cathedral, pull out a grenade, a fragmentation grenade to be specific. He threw it into the densest part of the crowd. Then the man turned to people standing next to him and apologized for what he'd just done. The grenade detonated as you'd imagine, or maybe like in the movies, quick and loud. But the thing about fragmentation grenades is that they're not designed to just explode. They're designed to kill through shrapnel. When one goes off, it sends hundreds of metal fragments flying at incredible speeds at every direction. Think about it like a bomb made of razor blades. The lethal radius is anywhere from 5 to 15 meters, but the shrapnel can travel much farther depending on how packed the area is. Almost simultaneously, a second grenade exploded about a block away at the intersection of Avenida Francisco Madero and Calle Andres Quintero Rue, right next to the Church of La Merced. Same method, same weapon, same devastating effect. People started screaming and running in every direction, trampling over each other, not knowing where the attack was coming from or if it meant more explosions were coming. The plaza was now covered in smoke, debris, and bodies. Dozens of people were sprawled on the ground in pools of blood, women, elderly people. Some were missing limbs, others had shrapnel embedded in their faces, chests, and backs. Within the first 24 hours, the death toll stood at 7, 5 women and 2 men. But the real horror was the injuries. 132 people were wounded, many critically. Some victims lost arms or legs. Others were permanently blind or disfigured by metal fragments that tore through their bodies. Governor Godoy immediately pointed to the cartels. Mexico's drug war had been escalating since President Felipe Calderón deployed thousands of troops against the traffickers in 2006. By 2008, the violence had already killed 2,700 people that year, but those killings were mostly between rival cartels or against security forces. This was different. This was an indiscriminate attack on civilians celebrating their country's independence because they wanted to send a message. But what message, and from who? Investigators believe La Familia Michoacana carried out the attack specifically to provoke a government crackdown on Los Zetas, who controlled that part of Michoacán, but to this day, nobody has been held accountable. The Kadereyta Jimenez massacre, beheadings. Around 4 a.m. on May 13th of 2012, residents near Highway 40 in Kadereyta Jimenez started noticing something was wrong. A foul odor drifted towards them and was so intense it could be detected from quite a distance away. Some people thought maybe an animal had died nearby or something mundane. Nobody imagined what was actually waiting to be discovered on that stretch of road. When Mexican federal police arrived at the scene just after dawn, they found 49 bodies. Yes, 49 bodies, all dumped along the highway about 75 miles southwest of the Texas border, but bodies doesn't even begin to cover it. Honestly, what they actually found were pieces of bodies. Each person had been completely dismembered, head severed, arms and legs removed. 43 men and 6 women reduced to torsos, all stuffed into black plastic bags. The forensics teams who arrived to process the scene had to wear face masks because the intensity of the smell was apparently unbearable. And not in an exaggerated way, because the Mexican authorities covering the area were said to have had to cover their mouths and noses just to function around the scene. Strangely, also, some of the bodies had been frozen and some of the bodies had been covered with lime. The rest were in advanced stages of decomposition, which could suggest that these people had been killed up to 48 hours earlier at a different location, then transported by truck to where they were found. It was the most bizarre puzzle right there in front of them, because each victim was methodically dismembered specifically to prevent identification, or at least make it nearly impossible to quickly identify who these people were. First, that's because decomposition changes the body so much that visual ID becomes almost impossible. And second, when bodies are dismembered, it's even harder for forensics teams to figure out who they were, when they died, or how. The cartels knew this. And despite what most people think, lime doesn't destroy bodies. It actually slows decomposition by stopping bacteria and hiding the smell. Freezing does the same, keeping tissue intact. Together, these tricks created confusing timelines that made it nearly impossible to tell when the victims actually died. So that left them with no faces to recognize and also no fingerprints to match, pretty much just anonymous flesh. By 2012, this exact method of decapitation had become the signature move, especially for Los Zetas and their main rivals, the Gulf and Sinaloa cartels. Then it quickly became clear that the first group was behind the massacre, but not because any of the police work. Right near the plastic bags was a banner claiming responsibility, signed by the Zetas, and specifically naming their top leaders. Heriberto Lascano, and Miguel Trevino Morales, known as Z40. A large black Z100% was spray painted on a nearby road sign just to make absolutely sure everyone knew who was responsible. Later, the police were able to identify the man behind the massacre as Jesus Daniel Elizondo Ramirez, known as El Loco, aka the Crazy One in English. He was arrested on May 18, 2012, just 5 days after the bodies were discovered. Under interrogation, he confessed that Lascano and Trevino Morales had ordered him to carry out the massacre to, quote, cause confusion among authorities and the public. The original plan was even crazier. They wanted the bodies dumped in Kadereyta's main plaza during daylight, but El Loco disobeyed and chose the highway instead. So, who were the victims? That became the cruelest part of this story. Initially, authorities said it might be Gulf Cartel members killed as part of the ongoing cartel war, but others suspected they were US-bound migrants who had been kidnapped from buses, couldn't pay the ransom Los Zetas demanded, and were slaughtered. Either way, no name showed up, and just like that, the government decided to throw all 49 victims into a mass grave, condemning them to anonymous deaths. More than 10 years after that event, and after extensive work done by anthropologists, 19 victims of the massacre had been identified. The rest remain unidentified. Jalisco New Generation Drug Cartel dissolved students in acid. Back in 2018, Salomon, Daniel, and Marco were making movies. Nothing more, nothing less. But you could say they were doing so in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that simple fact would be a death sentence for them. The three boys were making a horror movie for a class project when they disappeared. A month later, authorities confirmed that they'd been kidnapped, tortured, murdered, and then dissolved in acid by one of Mexico's most brutal cartels. And one of the guys that was part of the crew that did it, well, you wouldn't expect him to be a rapper, right? Yeah, in there as part of their cleanup team was a rapper with almost 125,000 YouTube subscribers who was apparently getting paid $160 a week for his services. Let me paint the picture for you. It's March 19th of 2018 and Salomon Aceves Gastelum of age 25, Jesus Daniel Diaz, and Marco Avalos, both age 20, three students from the University of Audiovisual Media, are out filming this thing in Tonala, Jalisco. They're shooting at a ranch, completely unaware that members of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel are watching the property, waiting for a rival gang leader to show up. The cartel members see these three guys with cameras and equipment, and they make the assumption that these must be scouts for the rival gang. So when the student's car breaks down on the highway, men dressed up as police surround them and force them into vehicles. The thing is, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel doesn't mess around. They're one of Mexico's newest and most aggressive cartels, formed around 2010, and they've been expanding rapidly through extreme violence. Anyway, the students are taken to another location. Salomon is questioned, tortured, actually, to find out what gang he belongs to. He quickly dies from the blows, and having gotten nothing from it, that's when the cartel members realize their mistake. These are just innocent guys. But instead of letting the other two go, they decide to get rid of all witnesses. Daniel and Marco are executed. To somehow fix this, the cartel calls their cleanup guy, Cristian Palma Gutierrez, better known as QBA, a 20-something rapper from Guadalajara. QBA had been recruited by a friend just 3 months earlier to work for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. His job was making bodies disappear, and he was getting paid 3,000 pesos per week. Now, disappear could mean a lot of things, but in this case, the guy was hired to use a method that Breaking Bad shows perfectly, dissolving bodies in acid. This was a method actually used by many cartels in Mexico, but one man in particular perfected it. Back in 2009, authorities in Tijuana arrested a man named Santiago Mesa Lopez. They called him the Pozole Maker. Pozole is a local stew, and you get the idea. Mesa worked for Teodoro Garcia Cimental, a lieutenant in the Arellano Felix cartel based in Tijuana, and his job was to carefully fill large plastic bins with acid, dump the corpses in, and bury whatever remained. But how are there any remains? Well, yes, there are remains because dissolving a body in acid isn't just a 1-hour affair. Acid breaks down a body by hydrolysis, eating away big molecules like proteins, fats, carbs, and DNA into much smaller pieces. And also, soft tissues dissolve faster than bone and teeth, but bone can be eaten away too. But apparently at room temperature, it can take a day or more depending on how strong the acid is. But this is a meticulous task. Even when criminals think a body has completely dissolved, microscopic traces of bone usually persist. Those traces are useful if you know exactly where to look. And yes, this is exactly what QBA did with these three guys. It took weeks for authorities to piece together what happened, but they finally did. When they finally arrested QBA and another suspect in April of 2018, the rapper confessed everything. The three students, quiet, talented, caring young men who just wanted to make films, had been dissolved in acid simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Alright, so I just wanted to make a statement in this video. There was something on my nose, like for the past, I don't know, maybe like 10 minutes for you guys. Luckily, I don't show my face that often, where I'm just, I show background footage, but I don't know what that was, bruh. Y'all gonna say it was a booger or something? Coincidentally, every time I check my recording, because I have it on this monitor, right? I didn't see that. But was it a booger? Was it drywall? Was it a parasite? I don't know. But my nose is clean. Look at my nose. Look. I don't know what that was, bruh. But am I gonna re-record? No. We're gonna keep it going. Just wanted to make that clear. I wiped my nose. let's keep going with the video. Cartel killed him and his dog, beheaded. So far we've covered terrible murders, but like in this next case when it's about your loyal dog trying to protect you, then dumped on your corpse as a final insult, that's beyond sadistic. This is exactly what happened to a man in Michoacan in 2007, in what locals described as one of the most brutal killings they'd ever seen. And these were people already hardened by daily bloodshed. So it was April 18th. A man connected to his Valencia gang is driving his truck when cartel gunmen intercept him. They force him out of the vehicle, and that's when his dog, an off-white mongrel, does what dogs do. It tries to defend its owner. The sicarios don't care. They tie the man's hands and feet, then proceed to torture him. They shoot him multiple times in the face, disfiguring him beyond recognition. But even when shot in the face, death isn't always instantaneous. There's a window of a few minutes where victims can remain conscious if major structures like the brainstem aren't hit immediately. That's why he was still alive at this point, but they're not done. To finish him off, they drive the man's own truck over his head, crushing his skull and brain. Then they shoot the dog in the neck and dump its body on top of his corpse. Finally, they nail a menacing note to the dead man's chest, a message for his relatives. And rather bizarrely, the whole scene unfolds in a street in the town of Buenavista, Tomatlan, for everyone to see at dawn. Even in a region where violence was becoming routine, this particular act of cruelty shocked everybody, and when I say routine, I truly meant it. This murder was just one of 4 bodies found that day in Mexico, but it speaks to something much larger happening in Michoacan at that time. A war between the Gulf Cartel and an alliance led by Joaquin Guzman, aka Shorty, that was tearing the state apart. The Valencia gang was caught in the middle, and the cartels were using increasingly theatrical violence to establish dominance. And the thing is, this wasn't even close to the worst of it. Less than a year earlier, something else happened in the state. On September 6, just past 1 a.m., 3 SUVs pulled up to a bar called Sol y Sombra in Urapan. About 20 men step out, all wearing fake Federal Investigation Agency uniforms, all carrying AK-47s and AR-15s, all with their faces covered, and they just opened fire on the building without mercy. Inside, it was chaos. Everyone was running through the club, trying to escape the bullets, when 2 armed men carrying black bags made their way to the dance floor. And then they simply dump the contents of the bags right in the middle of everyone. 5 human heads roll across the dance floor. The gunmen leave without saying a word, but they do leave something else behind. A cardboard sign with a message: "The family doesn't kill for money. It doesn't kill women. It doesn't kill innocent people. Only those who deserve to die. Know this, all people. This is divine justice." This was the world's introduction to La Familia Michoacana. And this massacre, many consider it the spark that ignited Mexico's full-scale drug war. 2 months later, President Felipe Calderón would launch his military offensive against cartels, starting not coincidentally in Michoacan. Murdered and hung on a bridge. Unfortunately, it's not a weird thing either for morning commuters in Mexican border cities to encounter violence on their way to work. But what motorists saw on Friday morning, June 13, 2025, at the southern entrance to Ciudad Juarez was something beyond horror. 2 bodies, one of them completely naked, were hanging from ropes suspended from a highway overpass on the Pan American Highway, displayed for everyone passing below to see. And just to make sure nobody missed the message, there was an abandoned black SUV nearby with a cardboard sign on the windshield: "There are your crystal dealers, Archie, for stealing fuel." Crystal here means crystal meth, because in Juarez, methamphetamine has become, because this is something currently happening. Anyway, it's become the cash crop of street drug sales for local gangs. It's big business. In just the last 2 years, U.S. Customs officers in El Paso alone seized over 7,500 pounds of meth at border crossings. So when someone messes with that business, when they steal fuel that's needed for meth production or try to muscle in on territory, this is what happens. They become a warning hung from a bridge. Now, if hanging 2 bodies from an overpass sounds extreme, let me tell you what happened about 400 miles south in Culiacan just weeks earlier. It was a Sunday night of June 30th. Around 11:30 p.m., authorities get reports of bodies on Highway 15 north of Culiacan. When they arrive, they found 4 decapitated bodies hanging by their limbs from a bridge. Nearby, there's a pickup truck and a bag with 5 severed heads inside, but that's not all. Inside the truck, investigators discover 15 complete bodies and 1 more decapitated body. 20 victims total, all male, all shot to death. There were messages too in this one on a tarp tied to a truck, others painted directly on the vehicle's frame. The messages indicated the attack was carried out by a faction led by Ismael Zimbada Siqueiros, aka Mayito Flaco, son of Ismael El Mayo Zambada. But those messages were aimed directly at the rival faction of Los Chapitos. the sons of Joaquin Guzman, aka El Chapo. This was 1 year into a brutal war between these two Sinaloa cartel factions. The conflict started in September of 2024, right after Miles Zambada was allegedly kidnapped by Joaquin Guzman Lopez, another of El Chapo's sons, and delivered to US authorities. At least that's the working theory. Since then, Culiacan and much of Sinaloa state have been literally drowning in violence. Back in Juarez, no arrests were made for the 2 men hanging from that overpass, and in Culiacan, none of the 20 men murdered have been identified. The only thing they know is that the cartels are involved. Kidnapped and forced to kill each other. Now, what if your night out with friends turned into the last moment of your life? Crazy, but it wouldn't be the first time we're talking about that on this channel. You might remember, for example, Irina Glazunova, a 24-year-old Russian influencer that we talked about a while back. She tripped and fell to her death literally on the street during a night out with friends. Anyway, this case right here is much worse. Back in August of 2023, 5 young men in Lagos de Moreno, Jalisco experienced exactly that. A night out turned deadly. Roberto Olmeda, Diego Lara, Uriel Galvan, Jaime Martinez, and Dante Sideo were just regular guys. They boxed together, went to the movies, worked normal jobs. They were engineering students, welders, and construction workers. Dante had won national cycling medals while Roberto helped his mom sell pozole on Saturdays. I mean, normal guys. On August 11th, they met up where they always did, the San Miguel lookout point in their hometown. At 10:55 p.m., they sent their last message saying they were heading home, but they never made it. By Sunday, fear had taken over their families. They gathered in public, desperate for answers and frustrated by the silence from authorities. It was that day that the search operations began, and somewhere along, they discovered a large bloodstain at one lookout. Still, it wasn't clear if it belonged to any of the missing young men. In the days that followed, police carried out several raids where they found a motorcycle, high-powered rifles with full magazines, stolen license plates, and bags of drugs, all potential clues in what was quickly becoming one of the most horrifying cases in the region. It turns out that the 5 friends were intercepted on their way home that Friday night. Their car, Diego's brown Volkswagen Jetta that he was so proud of, was later found burned on the highway between Lagos de Moreno and Encarnacion de Diaz, a notorious red zone where the Sinaloa Cartel and CJNG fight for control. Inside the trunk, police found charred human remains, but that wasn't the worst of this case. Just days after they disappeared, the killers started posting photos of them on their knees, gagged on a dirt floor with their faces smeared with blood. Soon, a video started circulating across all social media too, and I warn you, it's buried under layers and layers of censorship because of just how gory it is. But what I can tell you, with the help of 3D models, is that it shows the young men bound, bloodied, and forced to kill the others. One of them was handed a brick and forced to bludgeon one of his friends. Someone off camera was giving him instructions, tossing him tools to use, while 2 bodies already lay motionless in the foreground with their white shirts soaked in blood. The monsters behind this wanted everyone to know exactly what they had done to the 5 missing friends. The video even had text overlaid on it saying Puro MZ, a reference to Miles Zambada, leader of the Sinaloa cartel faction. Investigators later found the ranch where the video was filmed, discovering bloodstains on the floor and scattered shoes. On August 21st, authorities located 4 burned and decapitated bodies near where the young men were kidnapped. The bodies matched details from the video, decapitated, just like what was shown happening to one of the victims in that footage. And with all the pain in the world, the families confirmed those remains were their sons. Police officer burned alive. Ciudad Juarez in 2011 was literally one of the most violent cities on the planet. In fact, it had a homicide rate over 200 per 100,000 people. To put that in perspective, that's about 40 times higher than most major US cities. It sits right on the Texas border from El Paso, and by that time it had become ground zero for Mexico's drug war. President Felipe Calderón had declared his crackdown on cartels back in December of 2006, and since then about 43,000 people had died across Mexico. But Juarez was in a league of its own. And if you were a cop there, well, your life expectancy wasn't great either. That brings us to a Tuesday morning of December 20th, around 8:30 a.m. in the Paseos del Alba neighborhood. People are starting their day, heading to work and grabbing breakfast. Then a vehicle pulls up and dumps something, or rather someone, onto the street. It's Jose Everardo Sanchez, a 27-year-old municipal police officer. He'd only been on the force since August of 2010, so just over a year. His hands and feet are tied, and there's a plastic bag over his head. But they're not done with him. His attackers, still right there on the scene, doused him with some kind of flammable liquid, then they lit him on fire. Right there, in the middle of the street, in broad daylight. Several witnesses watched the whole thing happen. CNN reported that people saw him writhing in agony as he burned alive while the guys who did it were just standing right there. Now, Jose had been kidnapped the night before, on Monday. Nobody knows exactly where they held him or what they did to him during those hours, but Tuesday morning they decided to make an example out of him. They even left a note at the scene. Prosecutors confirmed it was there, but they never disclosed what it said. Judging by the way the cartels communicate, it was probably some message for the other cops about what happens when you don't play ball. Unfortunately, it wasn't even an isolated incident. Jose was the 33rd municipal police officer killed in Juarez just in 2011, the 59th in the last 15 months. That's more than one cop killed every week for over a year straight. It all came down to one thing that the cartels wanted everyone to know. It doesn't matter who's in charge, it doesn't matter how tough you think you are, they could still grab you off the street, tie you up, and burn you alive in front of everyone. Buried man alive. So I'm pretty sure we've all heard of El Chapo. He's quite literally the epitome of a cartel lord. He was one of the most feared and powerful drug lords on the planet. The guy who turned the Sinaloa cartel into a massive empire built on drugs, violence, and corruption. We've already talked about what his sons did, and from that, you might be right to guess that he's much worse. He was cruel, especially when it came to his enemies. El Chapo, unlike others, didn't let others do his dirty work all the time. He would in fact personally torture and murder. He did so to at least 3 men from rival cartels. Obviously, these are just the known cases. One of his victims was a member of the Arellano Felix cartel. When Valdez first saw him, the man already had burns made with iron all over his back. His shirt was literally stuck to his skin. Burns from a car lighter covered his entire body, and his feet were burned too. Someone had spent time methodically torturing this guy before El Chapo even got involved, but El Chapo wasn't even close to being done with him yet. They locked the man in a wooden structure for days, just left him there, not knowing when or if someone would come back. When they finally did pull him out, they blindfolded him, tied his hands and legs, and drove him somewhere. Freedom, maybe? No. They brought him to a graveyard. El Chapo started interrogating him right there. The man was responding, thinking if he just cooperated, maybe they let him live. But mid-sentence, El Chapo shot him with his handgun. Somehow, the man didn't die immediately. In fact, he was still gasping for air when they dumped him in the hole they had dug and started burying him alive. El Chapo carried out at least 2 other murders himself, but that particular murder was testament to how drug cartels buried people alive as a method of torture and killing. Another example of such requires us to fast forward to February of 2025 in Tabasco, where police got a tip about a 19-year-old kid named Rafael who'd been forced to sell drugs in Villahermosa for a cartel. When authorities found him, he was entombed inside a wall. Cartel members had literally built a concrete wall around him, creating a tiny space where he was trapped alive. Police had to use sledgehammers to break through freshly laid cement blocks, smashing their way in to reach the teenager inside, who incredibly was still alive in that concrete tomb. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you liked it, make sure to leave a like. If you think I earned your subscription, make sure to subscribe. I have a lot of morbid videos on this channel, so if you want to go check them out, make sure to do so. Last month was Iceberg month, so we had weekly uploads. I usually try to do weekly uploads, but all of those were icebergs. So if you want to check that out, if you want something to fall asleep to, aka my beautiful voice, make sure to binge my channel and give me that ad revenue. Follow me on Instagram @mynamestub. With that being said, I'll see you guys next time I upload.